everyone, I'm Rachel Lowe from Physiopedia, and today I am talking to Dr. Coralie English. Hi Coralie.
Hi Rachel.
Thank you for joining me today. I am looking forward to exploring your work and the work that you're doing for individuals with stroke. But before we do that, perhaps you could just introduce yourself to people, for those people that aren't aware of your work and what you get up to. Just tell us a little bit about your work and what you do.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks for the invitation. It's lovely to be able to contribute to Physiopedia. So my background is that I'm a physiotherapist, and I got interested very early on in stroke rehabilitation. So I worked clinically and decided very early on that rehab is what I really enjoyed, and did a lot of worked for a bit in spinal cord, but focused on stroke very early. And I got particularly interested in the idea of intensity of practice to start with, in terms of understanding just how much we should be asking our patients to do in rehab, and what the optimal way of delivering that therapy might be. So my first research started off in looking at intensity of practice, and I did a PhD project that looked at comparing circuit class therapy as a mode of delivering physio intervention for stroke rehab compared to what was usual care then and still is in many practices of a one appointment a day with a physio in rehab. So that then led into a larger national clinical trial where we did a more stringent three-armed randomised controlled trial looking at circuit class therapy as a mode of delivering physio. So I can talk a little bit further about the results of that if people are interested, but to give the overview then, I then have moved a little more into the physical activity space, because really what overlaps with that is that our bodies need to be active. Our bodies are designed to be up and moving. They're not designed to be sitting around. And we know how important exercise is for all of us in terms of improving our health, and particularly for improving cardiovascular disease risk. And if you've had a stroke, you have cardiovascular disease pretty much. There are a few people who have odd strokes from other causes, but by and large, by definition, you have cardiovascular disease if you've had a stroke. But it's so hard for people to get up and exercise. So while we need to understand, there's lots we still don't know about the effects of exercise and the optimum dose of that. But what if there's so many people who can't achieve what we know is beneficial? And that's what got me hooked on the sedentary behaviour aspect. So as I was merging into postdoc phase of my career was when the first evidence and papers were coming out about long periods of sitting time being bad for your health, and the potential of just doing a bit less sitting and a bit more moving around has the potential to improve health. And that hooked my interest for stroke, because if you can't get out and do your half an hour brisk walking every day, you don't do anything. But what if we knew that just getting up and getting off the couch more often is going to reduce your risk factors? If that's true, then that's another avenue for these people to improve their health, reduce their risk, improve their well-being. So that got me hooked on the sedentary behaviour side of things. And these days with technology, we have so much better ability to measure what people are doing and measure the impact of our interventions. So we started off looking at doing some observational studies. So I've done some of these, and others around the world have as well, in terms of how sedentary are stroke survivors? Can we compare them to age-matched controls? And really proving what we already know. Like sometimes research is a case of doing research that everyone else goes, well, of course, but the data isn't there to support it. So, the studies that we did to look at are people who've had a stroke more sedentary, as in spend more time sitting down every day than the healthy age-matched controls. Yes, guess what they are? It's not a big surprise, but we have good data for that now, not just from my study, but from other studies as well. And then we wanted to explore a bit more, well, why? What are the associations for that? I've done that, and there's been one or two other papers that have done that in secondary analyses of an observational study that have just looked at, of these people that we looked at over a week and these other factors that we measured, what things seem to be associated with high sitting time that might predict somebody who's going to sit more. And out of that, the big take-home message for physios is it's actually not about people's physical ability. So yes, there is some association between if you find it difficult to walk, you're more likely to sit. But it's not that strong, and it doesn't explain a lot. So it's not just that people can't get up and move, that they're sitting down. And certainly anecdotally you see in rehab settings, we've seen in our published papers of looking at people in rehab settings, you see with people who are living at home, who have good ability to get up and move, but they just don't. So there's behaviour stuff in there as well. Following that train of thought, and I do tend to do this, go off in tangents, but following that train of thought, what we've just completed here and are writing up some publications on now is a really exciting international study. So I love to collaborate with other people. And what we've done is we've got hold of all of the authors and people around the world who have been investigating sitting time after stroke, and most of them have used the same activity monitor, a little one that you attach to your thigh called the ActivePal. We contacted all of these people and said, would you like to contribute to one study where we put all of that together and look at all the other outcomes that were measured and see if we can have a better understanding of the associations of sitting time? And we did that. So we managed to get there was one study that we had some hurdles with ethics, so they couldn't share their data. But barring that, we've now got in one place all of the ActivePal data from that has been collected on stroke survivors later after stroke that's ever been collected around the world. And we've been doing some exploratory analyses on that data set. We've reprocessed all the data and we're looking at some of the associations there. And so we're still working through that. There's not a lot of the results that I can tell you, except that's going to give us a more powerful understanding of what some of these associative factors are for sitting time. So the other stream of work that comes out of that is looking at what the effects are on the body. Mm-hmm. So there's been some work in non-stroke that has looked at what happens at a metabolic level, what happens to our ability to metabolize glucose, what happens to our blood pressure when we sit all day versus if we get up and do some regular activity. So just last year, we did the first ever study of that in stroke, where we got stroke survivors into the lab, we got them to sit all day, and then we put them through these other experimental conditions of getting up regularly. We measured bloods. So for physio, I was getting very scientific. I didn't have just my stopwatch. I had bloods and I had blood pressure, and looking at what the effects are on the body in terms of glucose metabolism and blood pressure control. And again, I'm being a bit of a tease. I can't tell you too much about those results yet. Haven't gone through peer review, but there are some interesting findings that will come out of that, and we're going to build on in terms of what then is the optimal dose of reducing sitting time to get some effects, and how can we translate that into clinical practice. So that, to start with, is a big long waffle. What else can I...
Well, let's go back to, so your original work was about intensity of rehab. What sort of came out of that? What was the results of that in relation to intensity, and what's optimal for a stroke survivor?
And that's a really interesting question, and one that we still really don't have a clear answer for. But what we found in the circuit trial was that when you deliver physiotherapy services in a group circuit class situation for people in inpatient rehab settings, you can, by providing it in these group circuit classes, you can dramatically increase the amount of physiotherapy services they receive for pretty much the same cost.
Okay.
So we actually increased therapy time by 22 hours over 4 weeks. So they got 22 more hours of therapy, of time with a physio when they got it in a group circuit class, versus the usual care. What we've found, though, in terms of recovery, so our main outcome in that trial was walking ability, and used a 6-minute walk test, but for that outcome and for all the other walking and upper limb outcomes, we didn't see between group differences. So we delivered a whole lot more therapy time, but at a group level, it didn't change the functional outcomes. There was a non-significant but strong trend towards reducing length of stay. Mm-hmm. And particularly when we controlled for some of the other factors that influence length of stay, there's a strong suggestion that model of care might help reduce length of stay. The other arm in the trial was 7-day-a-week therapy, and that seemed to reduce length of stay a little bit as well. But other things we did in that trial was videotape a whole lot of the therapy sessions to be able to unpack what patients were actually doing in that time. So from a snapshot of all of I think we had about 7,000 therapy sessions recorded. Well, recorded as in happened, and of them about 80 videos. So a small percentage, but still a fairly large number of videos. And when we drilled down to pretty much minute by minute what was happening, the amount of the extra time in therapy was mostly spent extra time in activities, a little bit of extra time activities and standing, a lot of extra time doing activities and sitting, and almost exactly the same amount of time practicing walking.
Mm-hmm.
So the take-home message was that, and that time was around 8 minutes. And a previous systematic review that we'd done that had tried to pull together all the data that had reported on activity and therapies came up with the same number. So between that review, our usual care and our circuit class, there's this magical number of 8 minutes of walking practice. It seems to be consistently what people are able to deliver in a therapy session as therapists. So the take home is that you can provide a huge amount more physio service, but unless that translates to more activity for the patient in those therapy sessions, we're probably not going to see outcomes. There's been more reviews that have come out this year and big meta-regression papers that continue to tell us a story that more therapy is better, but that therapy has to be active therapy.
Active therapy meaning walking?
Meaning patients doing something.
Yeah, okay.
So more time in scheduled therapy sessions doesn't necessarily improve outcome. More patients doing more active practice, practicing meaningful activities more, more repetitions, more time, that will improve outcome. So circuit class therapy has the potential to deliver that, but this trial didn't because we didn't over-protocolise what would happen in those sessions, and therefore more practice didn't happen. So I think the challenge for clinical physios is to, first of all, really not just reflect, but find ways to collect data on how active your patients are in therapy. Because some of the other work that my various teams over the years have done and got some papers on is looking at how accurate physios are at estimating how much time their patients are active, and we're not great because we have busy therapy sessions, we're busy, we're having a lovely time with the patients and we're developing rapport with them, which is all fantastic. But oftentimes we think our patients are far more active than they are because the quick phone call that you had to make and the chatting with and helping somebody else's patient out and coming back to yours, the patient themselves aren't as active as they could be. And therapy sessions are hard to manage. We're busy. It's not from want of therapists being dedicated to their patients, but I think by being able to do some video auditing or having a time where you're sitting back and observing a whole therapy session that other people are delivering and measuring how active people are, helps then to think about, well, maybe people aren't as active as they could be. What else could we do to make that happen?
Yeah. So for the people that might be thinking about developing their stroke service or starting a new stroke service, what would you recommend to them to bring in for their therapy sessions?
Look, I do really think that setting up the model of circuit classes gives you the best opportunity to increase your practice time. But simply converting to everyone's being treated in circuit classes now rather than individual sessions without focusing on what's happening within those classes probably won't get much change into patient outcomes. It just provides a scaffold for that. But finding ways that people can do more throughout the day and a little bit and often is, I think, really important.
Okay.
And that's very different to how rehab services usually operate in terms of you have your physio appointment and now you'll have your OT appointment, and then most of the time you're on the wards not doing anything.
Yeah.
We can restructure that, I think, is a real challenge, and we don't know the optimal way to do it, except that we know the more time we can get people active and practicing, the better.
And so let's talk about, so this is coming on to your work with the sedentary sitting individuals. What recommendations can you make to physios to integrate into their practice to getting stroke survivors to move more through the day? Is there some advice that you can give on that yet, or is that to come?
I guess the main advice I think at the moment is that we think that's going to be important for people.
Yeah.
And there's another big meta-analysis that I can tell you about that's really interesting about why we think people are at such high risk. But we don't yet know just how much less sitting time you would need to do to make a difference. I think we can certainly say that overall sitting for too long is bad. The more you can get up and move is better.
Yeah.
But we don't yet know if there's a critical amount you have to do before it's beneficial. So I think at the moment, certainly, for all sorts of reasons, we should be encouraging our people to get up and move more often. And perhaps the big change from before is not just saying go to the gym and do your exercise. Yes, we should be doing everything we can to encourage people to get that level of physical activity. But if they can't do that, it's also saying even if you can't, if you try not to sit on the couch as much, if you think about what strategies would work for you in terms of goal setting to help you get up and move more often, then that's important. There is a whole lot of research effort going on in other groups as well around what are going to be the best behaviour change interventions to encourage people to sit less, because ultimately it will be about behaviour change. And that will mean different things for different people in terms of what's most likely to help enable people to sit less. I guess where our work at the moment is focusing on is understanding why they should sit less from a biological and a risk factor perspective that can help them be a motivator for people to do that. Yeah.
I know this isn't your area of work, and you just mentioned it's one of the other related groups' areas of works, but are there any sort of methods of behaviour change that stand out that we could we could talk about now and people could implement tomorrow or today?
There are lots out there, and I don't know that we know which ones are best. Certainly, there is a suggestion that some of the techniques that you might use for sitting time might be a little bit different than you would use for exercise, and some of the barriers for reducing sitting time are different because it's not about transport to get to the gym, it's about having a reason to move. There is a little bit of interesting work in just small goal setting. So there's a program or a concept called Small Steps, which is showing some favourable results, where you just asking people to make very small changes to start with and then getting a sense of achievement and then moving on to the next one. So that's a good place to start. Motivational interviewing as a technique has some good evidence behind it as well, particularly for addiction type behaviours. But in some ways you could think about sitting as being an addiction, I suppose, as well. But you have those sort of communication techniques can be worthwhile. But the other monitoring and feedback can be a big part of that as well. So thinking about different apps for people, and depending on what their level of technological comfort is and also their level of walking ability, but the sorts of apps that prompt you to stand up, or the wearable activity monitors that tell you how long you've been sitting for, those sort of things in terms of feedback can be really useful as well, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, so I was thinking about asking you about measuring activity, but and I guess in that situation, the Apple Watch is, and I know it's not a cheap piece of technology, but the Apple Watch is very, very good in that situation for telling you how long you've been sitting and monitoring those basic activities. It's not so great for athletes and things, but for that sort of situation, that sort of technology would work really well. Are there any other... You mentioned the Active Power, I think it was, for measuring things. Are there any other tools or apps in particular that clinicians could use to measure the activity of the people that they're working with?
There are quite a few these days, and quite a few free ones as well. And I'm not against all of them by any means, but and it depends on how people use their phone as well, if they have a phone. Or if they're going to use an activity tracker, any sort of activity tracker on the wrist. So most of the off-the-shelf activity trackers tell you about steps, less so about sitting particularly. But the two are fairly related in that if you're going to sit less, you're going to get up, and usually that will involve some steps. So, you can use that as a prompt for being more active. The ones that I know, the Garmin watch tells you about sitting time a little bit more, whereas I don't know that the Fitbit does. So there's all those newer apps, and they change so fast. But just doing some Googling around about what some of the wearables will tell you. But I know there's an app called Rise and Recharge that was developed in Australia that can prompt you to stand up and can help you set goals about getting up and moving more often. What I find difficult about that one myself is that it's on your phone, and my phone sits on my desk.
Yeah.
And I actually have a standing desk. So I was sitting down before, but I have a standing desk that I work at, but my phone's still sitting. So I could have been typing for half an hour at my standing desk, and then my phone will buzz and say, "You've been sitting for 3 hours," because I don't keep it in my pocket like most men do. So there are those apps around. You have to think about how they're going to be used by somebody in real life, but they're certainly worth exploring with people. And we've done a little bit of work coming into it thinking, people with stroke are older, they're not going to like using technology. And that's changing very, very rapidly. And I think as physios, we have to get over that hang up that maybe older people aren't going to engage in technology, because they usually do quite well. So we have an opportunity to be using that sort of technology more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the other thing that I'm thinking about as well is we're not talking about we're talking about individuals with stroke or stroke survivors, and we're not necessarily talking about individuals who are highly functional. They may not have a high level of function, and it's not about going to the gym all the time, is it, and doing lots of exercise and activity. It might just be that someone needs to stand up. Or could it be as simple as they need to move their arms or something like that? Yeah. So I think is it important for us to consider that this is across the board sort of clinical things that we should be thinking about?
Yes, absolutely. And some of the the lab-based work that we're doing that I alluded to before is suggesting that even activities in standing could be just as beneficial as activities in walking. But it probably needs to be a little bit of active standing. So it probably needs to be at least a bit of a moving on the spot as opposed to completely static standing. Because the mechanism by which we think prolonged sitting is so bad for you is mostly around the fact that your muscles go to sleep. They're not actively metabolizing what they should be. Okay. So it's less about energy expenditure per se and more about your muscles being active. So it's actually quite hard to stand statically anyway, if you're able-bodied, but standing and doing a bit of movement in standing is actually activating those large muscle groups, and we think the mechanism by which things get switched on and your glucose metabolism improves and all that sort of stuff. So yes, I think if people aren't highly functioning, if they can at least stand and do a little bit of something in standing, we think that's probably going to give some benefits. In terms of just sitting and doing arm movements, probably less so if you're talking about those whole body risk factor reductions. Certainly in terms of intensity of practice for arm function, that's a different story.
Yes. Yeah, I realised that as soon as I'd mentioned it, actually.
Yeah, but it might be that for those people who are non-ambulatory, maybe we doing exercises, simple resistance exercises in sitting, because at least you're getting big muscle groups working, might be beneficial. Yeah. And that's where we're sort of at in the landscape of sitting time research and understanding what it's all about, is we have really strong research from epidemiological studies that talk about associations. So the big meta-analysis I alluded to before I think is fascinating. It was in the Lancet, so that's a massive journal, and they pulled together 1 million data sets of over 1 million individual people, not stroke, this is general adults, and looked at that association between exercise, sedentary behaviour, and cardiovascular disease and other diseases and death, basically, and looked at how it relates. And what it showed really strongly is that if you were in the highest sitting time group, so you spend the longest sitting, which we know our stroke survivors sit in that bucket, and also have very, very little physical activity in terms of huffing and puffing exercises, you're at the highest. You definitely have a strong increased risk of cardiovascular disease and of dying early. But as you're more active and less sitting, it's down here. So it's this curvy linear association. It goes up like that. So we have really strong data about those associations, but we don't have great data yet. We don't know yet whether the opposite is true, whether if you reduce sitting time, do you reduce risk? We don't have good cause and effect data. So it all seems to suggest that if you do these things, you're going to reduce someone's risk, but we don't know yet if that's true or how much less you have to do to counteract that risk. But coming back to the what you should be doing with your patients, though, there's no harm in doing these things, and there may well be good benefit to them. So I think I would be encouraging people to be thinking about how they can have their patients be more active in whatever way they can.
And just as, and I know there's no answer to this. I know I shouldn't really ask you this because I know there's no answer. But so when I'm working at my computer all day, I stand up every hour. Well, my computer tells me to, whether I do or not, because of that bad behaviour, is a different matter. So how for the individuals, for the stroke survivors that are sitting all day, if you're going to just start saying to them, you need to stand up this often, how often should it be? What's the kind of...
And that's squarely what we're looking into now.
Yeah.
That's kind of work out now. But I can say, based on other research, that there's been some really positive results from getting up every 20 minutes or half an hour and doing 2 or 3 minutes of gentle walking, active standing. So we know in non-stroke populations, compared to sitting all day, though that sort of a half an hour break paradigm produces good benefits for people in the short term.
Yeah.
So that's a good place to start. It may well be less and it may well be more for stroke. But that's a good ballpark to start with.
That's quite often, isn't it, actually? I think that's more, yeah.
It is quite often, and we don't know if less is just, that's a pretty big jump to say to somebody, to improve your health, you need to, every half an hour for the rest of your life, get up and move for 3 minutes. It's not really clinically translatable. So that's what we're working on right now, is moving into, compared to a normal high sitting day. So the other thing is all those studies have compared it to 8 hours if you can't get up at all unless you need to go to the toilet. So a really strict protocol. But compared to somebody who sits most of the day, compared to an average day, if you increase it by a 5-minute walk in the morning and a 5-minute walk in the afternoon, is that enough? Or does it have to be 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the afternoon, or 4 5-minute breaks across the day? Something that's a little bit more closer to being clinically translatable to this is what if I advise my patients to do at least this, I know that's going to give them benefit. Hopefully, watch this space. Hopefully we'll be able to tell you that at some point in time.
So I am looking forward to those results. Do you know when you might be able to share them with us? You know when it's going to be?
The ones from the study last year, we will hope to have submitted somewhere for publication in the next few months. And the ones looking at the dose finding, we're just starting those studies now. So they'll just have a little longer.
Coralie, your work's fascinating. I think I really enjoy the way that the physical activity research is coming together with the research for rehabilitation for individuals with stroke. I think that's fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to the outcome of your work, so that we can. I guess there'll be more to follow that you want to do, that you have to do after that things that come from this study, but the answers from this study will really help clinical practice, I think, in a great way. So it's been fascinating to talk to you and understand what you're doing. Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you would like to share with physios across the world about anything that you've been working on, or anything that you feel you'd like to share with physios to help them work with their patients who have stroke?
I think the main thing I would say is, I've got the echo back again, sorry. I think the main thing I would say is that we need to continue to work really closely together between clinicians and researchers to help to inform each other's work. So to make sure that what we're doing in research is as clinically applicable as it can be, so that it's easily translated, and that that clinicians are helping to be able to implement that evidence as it comes out and translate it into practice. And stroke rehab research is getting better and better. There are now much better international efforts around trying to collaborate and do big projects together. So I would encourage people to think big who are looking into doing research, and to think about how they can, in their clinical practice areas, work to support research efforts that are happening that can help deliver on better outcomes for our patients.
Yeah.
And am I allowed to do a quick little plug, Rachel?
I was just about to ask you, where can people find more about you and anything you'd like to share?
So I guess the other plug is, so people can find me quite easily. It's quite a nice thing about having the name of Coralie English. You can Google it and find my homepage and links to ResearchGate and that sort of things quite easily, and I'm more than happy to be contacted. But the other thing that I've just developed, and this is something that helps to support our research efforts locally as well, but I have an online course running that is designed for busy clinicians, and it's not stroke specific, designed for busy clinicians who want to upskill a bit on how to quickly search and appraise research evidence to answer clinical questions. So we actually it's opening again soon. I run it a couple of times a year, and people can follow my Twitter handle to find out more about that.
Which is?
So my Twitter handle is @Coralie_English.
Okay.
So it's easy enough to find. And on there, you'll be able to see links to the online course. We have an early bird that's closing next Wednesday, early bird rate for the next course. But it gives clinicians really quick practical skills in refreshing and updating how they can search and appraise research literature to then put into practice.
So important, so important. I'm almost tempted to do that myself as well. It's because it's such a key skill that everybody needs to have, and I think everybody is quite turned off by reading all the literature, and I think if we can be given short, quick, practical skills to use in appraising the literature and finding those little tidbits that we can put into our practice, I think that's really important. So a valuable course. So when is that course running? What's the date?
So the next time that's being offered, it's a 4-week course, and it opens next on the 7th of June.
Okay.
So people have to register before the 7th of June. But depending on demand, I'll run it a couple more times this year. Once you're online, it's open for 4 weeks, and you can work through the material at your own pace. It's designed to do a couple of hours every week for 4 weeks, but if you want to get in and do it all on a weekend, you can.
Excellent. And all of that, I imagine, goes back to supporting your research that you're doing, so very valuable as well. Good. Okay. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you'd like to share? I've asked already, but... No,
that's great. Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for sharing your work with us and your thoughts. And I think there's been a good few clinical tips for people to take into their practice, which is always very useful. So it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate it.